People will look at you straight in the face and be like, Subaru has no character development while watching this episode of ReZero. They'll be like, Subaru is the same whiny, crybaby, weak-willed individual that refuses to use return by death to be able to, settle his issues and his problems. And I'm just like, are we watching the same show? Are we really watching the same show? Because I have seen this debate pop up once again in these past few episodes, especially with the events that happened in last episode. I'll talk about that in a second. But the point of the matter is that regardless of people's stances, if they say Subaru has no development or not, this scene alone just shuts that down instantly. It's like, this is a complete moment here that emphasizes his development, not just from Season 1, but from Season 2. And how Subaru has not just become a knight, but also has become very greedy in terms of those he wants to protect around him. On paper, it sounds very simple, very cliche, and that's what it looks like. But when you dive deeper into the themes and the character of Natsuki Subaru, you see just how well written Tape-sensei has made him. He is truly an excellent character that continuously develops as the series goes on, which is a given since he's the MC, but it's just his character development is so realistic, and it's amazing following a character that legitimately is, let's be honest, he's a loser, he's weak, but even despite that, of him being a loser and him being weak, he somehow manages to inspire those around him and is able to overcome obstacles that just seem nigh impossible. I love Subaru, man. He's a great character, and honestly, you can write like a 500-page paper potentially on Subaru's character, diving into the intricacies of what he does within the story, because that's just how well written he is. There's just so much about his character that you can analyze in terms of, like, let's say his family dynamic, to his dynamic not just with Emilia, but Beatrice, but his dynamic with everyone around him, friend and foe. There's so much. In this scene here where he's like, I'm Emilia's knight, and he says this with such confidence, it's beautiful, because it's just a perfect bow and ribbon on top that has been set up basically since the halfway point of ReZero Season 1. So let's segue into this, and what this whole moment means, and just why it's so beautiful, and how Subaru won't let little things trip him up and stop him from accomplishing his objective. So this little scene here, you have it to where Anastasia and Julius, they're basically talking about the situation in the city, and how the entire city currently is obviously in turmoil. There's casualties, there's people dying, you have Raph causing people to literally go crazy, causing just constant riots and stuff between the people. We have obviously Capella that has morphed and destroyed people's overall bodies. I mean, look at what happened to Crush in this episode, and also to a degree Subaru. Then we have also Greed and him setting up this whole wedding ceremony with over 200 plus wives, pretty much making a mockery of what it means to be a husband and wife, but also disrespecting Emilia, all these different things, basically the current status of the town. That's what, Anastasia, Julius, and Subaru talk about, and they basically say the current objective right now is to save the majority and sacrifice the minority, and that seems logical, but this goes into the development that Subaru got in Season 2, and what Rosewall and also Echidna was pushing Subaru down, the path that he was going to go down, if theoretically he would have agreed to what they wanted. So, before I get ahead of myself, the point is that Subaru completely had a lot of things that came up into his face with Anastasia talking about, sacrificing the minority for the majority, and the situation of the town and stuff, but Subaru shuts that down, and he talks about, like, no, we can't sacrifice the minority of the town to save everyone, because that's not right, because the people that go into combat, go into battle, they're putting their lives on the line, and they know the risks, they know what they're doing, but those that are innocent civilians, women and children, they didn't asked to be put into this situation or involved in it. They don't deserve to die. And so, because they don't have that risk, they're not technically soldiers, knights, or whatever, Subaru feels like they need to be saved more than anyone else, which is very logical, and I really just love the whole determination he has within him, and it represents his motivation of how precious life really is. So, I guess, now that I've kind of flirted with that whole conversation, let's get into it. So as we know, the big lesson that Subaru learned in Season 2 was that he needs to love himself more and appreciate life, and also understand that one of the reasons why the Witch of Envy, or Satla, gave him Return by Death was not for him to use Return by Death continuously to save everyone. Return by Death was given to him to protect Subaru, to protect his psyche, and allow him to actually have a fulfilled life. It was always there to safeguard him to where he actually could live a fulfilling life. It was never meant to destroy him, to psychologically mess him up. Obviously, there's been cases that it actually obviously has, but the point of the matter is that the intention of Return by Death and what Subaru learned from Season 2 was that he cannot use that power willy-nilly and throw his life away just because one thing goes wrong. It's not right, and it's a complete disservice and a mockery of those around him and those that perish, die, and fight for what they believe in. And that's what Subaru's saying is, he is very well aware that there is people around him that has died. He is aware that there is knights and soldiers that have died thanks to the witches' cult's invasion on the city. But even despite that, and obviously if he doesn't use Return by Death, they will be forever lost. What he says in this conversation to Anastasia is that they knew the risks. They knew what they were getting themselves into. It's like the whole situation with the White Well, and how Subaru knew that there was people that died in that fight, but even despite that, he still carried forward because he was trying to reach that happy ending. So the situation here is great. I love the dialogue around this, how Subaru appreciates life, and also he appreciates his own life. He's not trying to just throw it away. He's trying to learn to love himself, so to speak. It's just great. It's a nice little bit of progression that showcases his character and how far he's come since the earlier seasons, and that this is just, honestly, this is the beginning of his development from zero. There is just so much more that he can do to grow as a person, and I love that. This is why I love ReZero and why I'm such a massive fan of it, because Tappei does such a fantastic job with the characters. So enough with the, Natsuki Subaru glazing for a second. Let's get into the current situation at hand and talk about things that obviously some watchers might not understand from this episode. And so let's start off with this segment, which, it's very abrupt, and I'm going to try to talk about this in the best way possible that isn't spoilers, because it is a very vague scene. So I'm just going to say that. So I'm going to keep it vague, but I want to explain it to those that just don't understand, okay? So basically, this segment here, you literally see Subaru having some form of dream sequence. He's been thrown into a torrent of just, like, miasma or curse or whatever's going on around him. The very color palette around Subaru in the background is reminiscent of the very colors that you see with Return by Death and, just when Satla interacts with him. But there is another thing it looks like, and it looks like Capella's blood. As we know from the last episode, Subaru had forced blood put on him. For instance, from Capella, she poured her cursed dragon blood into him and into his wound on his leg where his stump was. And on top of that, we saw what she did to Crush. She poured it all over her face and everything, and we know that situation is definitely dire. I'll talk about that later on in this video. The point is that Subaru clearly had a curse enter into his body, and it was established early on in Season 1 of ReZero that curses activate very differently. They are, sometimes they can be dormant, sometimes not, and the big, explanation of this is the Garm, aka the mob beast that Subaru went up against in the early stages of Season 1. As you remember, Subaru, he got bit by the mob beast and stuff, and the reason, like, we had the whole situation with Ram and Rim and Rosewell coming in and saving the day, destroying all the Garms, all the mob beasts in the forest, was because if they get rid of the cursed user, then technically the curse might be able to not activate. It could save Subaru. That was the whole point of it. However, from my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong here, those that know better have recently rewatched Season 1, but the curse isn't technically gone. For instance, all the bites that the Garm and the Mob Beast did to Subaru in Season 1, it never disappeared, they never activated, because the Garms, the ones that put the curse on him, just died. So they're always been dormant inside of his body. So he's had those multiple curses just in his body for a very long time now. And so you throw in Capella's blood that was poured on top of that, curses are starting to mix. Now, there is an argument to be made that maybe Return by Death is also a curse, and maybe even the Unseen Hand as well, or Invisible Providence, is potentially a curse. That already mixes things up even worse than it already is. But let's just keep it into the Capella stuff and the Mob Beast blood for a second, okay? So, Beatrice said in Season 1 that when there is multiple curses placed on a user, they become very tangled. It's like a yarn ball. It's become so tangled, it can't be removed so easily. It's too intertwined, and it becomes something new, something distorted, so to speak. And so in this case, we can assume, since we saw actual imagery of Garms and also the dragon Capella within his dream sequence here, we can assume that these are the battling of two curses within his body, potentially fighting for dominance. For instance, the Garms curse from Season 1 and Capella's blood, and they're mixing up like a yarn ball. That's what's happening here. So that is the best explanation I can give without anything else, because it's very apparent what's going on here if you keep up to date with context clues, but obviously there is no explanation for this because there's just no dialogue. But I do think it's pretty apparent something happened with the blood, because when Subaru wakes up, you know, his leg is, let's be honest, his leg's not looking too good. It's looking like a raisin. Let's just be completely honest. It is probably one of the most horrific looking things you could probably see, especially if you wake up. But his leg is there, and it is recovered. And Priscilla even showcases the properties of his leg, where, like, when she stabbed his leg, it's not apparent if he felt a lot of pain or not, but when she stabbed it, it healed. So, Subaru's leg has regeneration. We don't know necessarily how good the regeneration is, but we can only assume to a degree it might be almost at the same level as Capella's regeneration, which, if so, that's insane. That's ridiculous. Like, that is actually powerful. That means that Subaru's leg, theoretically, if it could regenerate from the stump over and over again, he could use that as a weapon. Obviously, that probably wouldn't be a good thing psychologically, but he could theoretically use his leg and really just use it to overcome certain obstacles and damage it, and it will instantly heal. So, even though this seems really bad at the current moment, at this point it seems like more of a blessing than a curse for Subaru's body. However, if this theoretical curse, you know, from his leg gets a lot worse, and let's say it spreads to his entire body, then that means the essence of return by death would be a lot harder to use. And let's dive into that theory. So this isn't spoilers or anything like that, do not worry guys, but theoretically, we know that Capella even said in the last episode that Subaru, she's looking forward to seeing what Subaru turns into and what, you know, Crush turns into thanks to the cursed blood that's entered to them. And for all we know, the effects on his leg, this could spread. It could get worse. Maybe if he gets a wound somewhere else, it might start morphing with this, you know, blood and curse or whatever and get a lot worse. We don't really know. Whatever the case may be, the point of the matter is that if theoretically this curse did spread to his entire body, this means that Subaru would not be able to use fundamentally one of the most useful tools in his arsenal, aka return by death. And I don't think I need to explain how scary that would be if Subaru wasn't capable of using return by death. Now, this obviously sounds very counterintuitive, especially with the whole moment of rambling I had at the beginning of the video, Subaru appreciating his life and not having to rely on return by death, but it's still a very necessary tool, because he does encounter a lot of strong foes, and he will continuously encounter strong foes for the remainder of the story until the final chapter eventually comes out. So the point of the matter is that Subaru, if this curse spreads, it might come to a point to where he won't be able to die, which means that he won't be able to reset, which means that those that do die will be permanently gone. I think that paints an obvious image of what potentially could happen for what Capella did to his leg. So, enough with the theory crafting, let's get into the other nitty-gritty details of this episode. We really gotta talk about this Priscilla scene, where she pulls out the Yang sword. This is honestly such an incredible moment for a variety of reasons, and even if you're just an anime only, and let's say you're not a, like, light novel or web novel reader, this moment is very important to really establish a lot about Priscilla's character, and how she isn't just this, almighty or acting like an almighty that she deserves everything type of character. There clearly is some nuance to her, a lot more layers to her than what it first appeared. It does seem in her own way she does care about people. Maybe she just doesn't know how to show it. Maybe there is just something wrong with her personality, she can't express it. Maybe she has other reasons. But this episode and this scene in particular does show that Priscilla is a character that will reward people that obviously entertain her, but also do something that obviously benefits benefits her in some way. She is not a character that just takes. She also gives. And it really shows a lot about her character, because obviously first impressions, and even what Subaru would get from her from season 1, is that she is a character that's all about herself. Anything else that is not affiliated with her is just irrelevant. Anything that doesn't benefit her is irrelevant. You know, she just seems like she is always just all about herself. She has such a massive ego. But obviously from this scene, there's a lot more to her than that. She allowed Subaru to talk back to her to a degree. She allowed Subaru to basically explain the situation, and she listened to him. There was a lot about this scene that felt very un-Priscilla-like, which is a big moment for her character to really establish that there's just so much going on with her that meets the eye. And I love that. I can't talk too much more about that, because obviously that would lead into spoiler territory, but I love this moment so much because it shows she is not a one-dimensional character. There is so much more going on, but at the end of the day, this is ReZero, and this is Tape that writes the story, and so you can't really expect a character to be one-dimensional. I mean, let's think of, like, Sloth for a second, and what we learned from him from Season 1 to Season 2 and all that with Amelia's past. There was just so much more that dived into his character and gave him just so much more love and attention as a character. Why people will start looking at him very differently, sympathetically, and also say this man's a victim in comparison to what we saw in Season 1 with what he was doing to Subaru and Amelia and Rim. But I'm getting off topic. The point of the matter is that this Priscilla scene is incredible, and, you know, she basically says, your reward for everything that you just did for me is to show you this sword and also save you. And at first glance, she shoves Subaru on the ground. It looks very rude what she does, like, why would you do that? But then, obviously, we see these mob beasts come in, or these demi-human beasts, and as they come in, basically, she starts to slice them up. And I think this segment really showcases Priscilla is not weak. I think that was kind of obvious, but I think that this scene really showcases that. Like, let's really back up here. Let's just look at the scene for a second, okay? They all jump at Priscilla as she ignites her sword, and as basically they jump at her, it looks like they go completely slow motion, and you see her just, like, you know, swinging her blade around, and it looks like all the mob beasts here just they stop. Like, it's like they're frozen in time. And this basically showcases the speed feat of Priscilla and how fast she is. That she is literally so good with the sword and so fast that the creatures around her basically weren't even moving to her eye. Her speed feat is insane in this moment. Now, I do think that this scene might come off awkward to a degree because of the CGI, but I personally don't hate it. I think it really builds up Priscilla's character that she can defend herself. She is not weak. She is not reliant on other people to protect her. She can fight for herself, which is honestly an amazing thing to, you know, witness within this episode. But that is enough for Priscilla. Actually, no, that is incorrect. There is another scene about Priscilla that does need to be talked about, and it is this whole scene where we have the bard singing and knocking everybody out of, you know, Raph's authority, and Subaru basically mentions to Priscilla, is like, you did this purposely, didn't you? Now, Priscilla, she says that she didn't intentionally do this. She was just looking for Al. She wasn't intentionally trying to save, you know, the people within the shelter. But even if she says that or not, it's very clear her intention keeping the bard around and allowing the scene was that Priscilla didn't have necessarily negative, you know, intentions. That she had positive impressions that the bard could be capable of this, and I feel like there is a lot more going on with Priscilla's character here than that meets the eye. She is aware of certain situations and more things than what's currently going on, what she could currently see. She has a better understanding, so to speak, of the world and the current combat situation. Anyways, any more than that, and I would obviously get into spoiler territory. So let's talk about Amelia real quick, and Regulus, and the multiple wives. This episode really, oh man, it gives so much more character to Regulus. I mean, we know he's a scumbag basically since, yeah, Season 2. We've known since his first encounter with, like, Crush and Rim and all that what happened. He's not a good man. I mean, go figure. I mean, he's a Sin Archbishop. I mean, we should have figured that already. But his character really is becoming absolutely terrible. Like, his personality is just truly appalling. I would still say that Capella's personality is much worse than Regulus's, but Regulus is easy to hate because of what his character expresses. I mean, just in this episode alone, did, like, kidnapping, he did assault, he did, like, you know, he threatened basically destroy public buildings. He, was going to actually commit murder against one of his wives. Obviously abuse. It's just, there's so much going on within this episode with his character. It's very easy to see him just selfishly, and makes sense, he is greed, so it fits with his character completely. But it's just like, oh my goodness, what a character. What a sin, Archbishop. His interaction, though, with Amelia is fascinating, because obviously it shows that even though Amelia is just trying to keep it calm and cool and all that, she's not necessarily in full danger yet. It's clear that it is pissing off Regulus. Regulus is getting a little bit upset, and you can see his face and reaction. He's very disappointed with her mood and her depression or whatever's going on, and it seems like once the wedding ceremony is officially over, how he's going to treat Amelia is probably going to be like what he does to all his other wives. I mean, he's basically imprisoned and enslaved his wives. You see him ordering 200 wives to set up the church and the wedding ceremony, and they literally cannot speak. Like, you see how he treats them, that he basically says, you can't really speak or anything, they just have to say yes sir or whatever, and it's messed up. Like, it's actually messed up how his character is. He is an extremely unlikable individual, and I can see a lot of people hating him more and more after this episode came out. But with all that being said, there is one last scene to really discuss that is incredibly important, and it is the Wilhelm scene with Felix, and also the scene with Subaru getting back his whip. I guess let's talk about that. So this scene right here, Wilhelm gets slapped by Felix, and it's a very sad scene, and it's very clear from the overall interaction that Wilhelm feels responsible. It's not his fault, but he feels responsible. And Felix, obviously being very angry and temperamental, took out his frustration on Wilhelm. And this scene is very particular for a variety of reasons, because it more or less showcases the flaws in Felix's character, and how he more or less, he acts before he thinks. He emotionally acts. And this has been showcased technically at the beginning of Season 2, when you saw how Crush obviously lost a lot, and how Crush wasn't doing so hot, like lost her memories and everything. Felix instantly wanted to just end the overall alliance with Amelia's camp, and was basically kind of blaming all of them for it. It shows that Felix doesn't want to take responsibility, and will blame everyone around them before Felix blames themselves. Now, we don't really know if that is true, because obviously we haven't seen the inner psyche of Felix in this moment, but there is a lot of mixed emotions here, where it's a lot of, like, blame game going on, and Felix trying to shift the regret from himself to others around him, and that's what it looks like. And regardless if that is true or not, obviously Wilhelm feels responsible too, because at the end of the day, he is meant to protect Crush, and since technically we know she got irreparably damaged now, it's very clear that, yes, he would feel very upset about the whole situation, and I can't help but feel bad. I really can't help but feel bad for Wilhelm, because this is not just the first or the second, but the third time he's kind of failed somebody, and technically fourth if you want to consider the alternate timeline where Subaru died in front of him. But, this is, in this timeline at the very least, this is the third time that Wilhelm has really suffered a massive L. The first was obviously he lost his wife. The second time was with Crush being, like, messed up by greed and gluttony at the beginning of Season 2, and now this is Crush getting messed up by lust with, whatever's going on with her body. We didn't really get to see an image of her, but we can only imagine, just thinking about Subaru's leg and how it looks like a raisin, we cannot imagine what Crush looks like. She was a very beautiful character, and you cannot imagine what Capella, with her very toxic personality, what she did to Crush and how she currently looks. So, Wilhelm feels responsible because, his job was to potentially protect, his actual, candidate, the actual world candidate Crush, but clearly he wasn't capable. And he probably feels indebted to Subaru, because it's mentioned right after the scene that, Subaru's whip that he has been using a little bit, was used to wrap Crush around the dragon leg to get her out of the building, away from lust, and stop her from potentially dying. And so Subaru, despite having literally no leg, like he lost his leg in that moment, and everything going on with blood loss and everything, his first instinct was to wrap his weapon around Crush and the dragon leg to get her out and save her. And obviously they all saw that. Everyone here, when she landed, when Crush landed, Wilhelm, Felix, all of them, they saw that it was Subaru's whip, and they're like, he saved her. They know that. And that's why you see literally no blame going towards Subaru, he did his absolute best. And Wilhelm probably feels indebted not just to Subaru, but also he feels, you know, like a loser, probably. And it's extremely sad. It's a very sad scene for him, and I can't help but feel so bad for him, because no matter what he does, he always takes a beating. He always gets hit by a stick in the face, basically, and that's how it's been for a very long time. But, yeah, overall, this episode of ReZero is incredible. There is one scene in particular at the end of the credits scene where you see Amelia pick up the media and talks with Al. Don't really know what's really going on with that scene, so I'm not going to really elaborate. But something's going on there, so, yeah. Overall, great episode of ReZero this week. I cannot wait to see what happens next, but I'll leave it at that. I love you guys. You be safe, stay healthy, and today was a good day. Chibi out.